Eduardo, just 1 second. I'll be back in 1 second. Thank you very much, Eduardo. How are you doing?
I'm doing quite all right. How are you, Dominic?
I'm very well. I'm very well. It's a very hot day here in England.
Yeah, it's a very a brisk morning here in New York. I'm on holiday, so those of you who tune into Decred in Depth typically know I'm in Oklahoma. Today we're in New York, and anything you'd like to say before we get started, Dominic?
No. Thank you for having me. I'm really going to enjoy this. I think it's really good that you've invited me, and because people are only going to see words on a screen, and it's often you want to look in. If you're thinking of giving somebody money, you want to look into the whites of his eyes and know if this person's dodgy or not. So I'm delighted to be able to come in here and talk.
Yes, I had some of the same thoughts, just an opportunity to hear your voice. Words behind a screen can often get conflated with different tones, and be able to, hopefully people will tune in and we'll get some questions in the live stream. But, before we get started, uh, I know many will know who you are, but for those who may not, can you tell us briefly about your background?
Sure, I'll give you a very quick resume. I'm 51 years old. I'm a Londoner. I live in London. And I started out my career when I left university. I decided I wanted to be a writer. And I looked at all the best writers in the world, and they'd all started out as actors, from William Shakespeare and Charles Dickens and all the rest of it. So I went to drama school. And for some bizarre reason at drama school, I was the best at radio. And I don't know why. I always seem to come top in radio. And when I left drama school, I got a voiceover agent, and voiceovers is a very nice life, and it's very well paid, and you get very well looked after. And so I started out just doing voiceovers, and within a week of leaving drama school, I was getting work. And then I wrote this song. We're in the late 90s now. And I wrote this song called The Upper Class Rap, which was a comedy song. And I tried to get it released as a Christmas novelty single. And I went to a friend of mine who I was at university with, who I knew was in the music business. And he said, go and do it at my brother's club. So I went and did it at his brother's club. And little known to me, this was one of the sort of roughest comedy clubs in the country. And I went and did an open spot there. And everyone was getting booed off. And I went and did my song. And it went down very well. And this club had a rule at the time: if you went and did an open spot there and it went well, they gave you a paid booking. So the very next week I had a paid booking. And for some reason, they really liked me in the club. And they got me loads of other bookings in other clubs in the area. And suddenly I was a stand-up comic almost by accident. But I wasn't really a stand-up comic in the way that you think of, like Jerry Seinfeld or somebody like that. I was doing sort of comedy songs. And so then I was doing that. And then by the mid-noughties, I was still doing my voiceovers and writing odd bits and odds and sods. And I'd made quite a bit of money, and I was looking to invest it. And, you went to talk to these various fund managers and so on. And they were all, wanted their 1% and 2%. And I was like, I don't really like the sound of this. There was always something about finance that wasn't right. I couldn't articulate what was wrong with it, but it was just in my head, it wasn't right. And then, the internet was becoming quite big at this point. We're in about 2005. And I started reading on the internet, and I discovered gold. And I was like, now this makes sense to me. The history of gold, and gold's a very political metal because it used to be money. And some would argue that it still is money. That all hinges on what your definition of money is. But anyway, and I started reading about gold, and I started reading about fiat money, and I started reading about debt and leverage. And suddenly I understood something that I'd never been able to grasp, which was why houses were so expensive. Particularly in London, how could houses be so expensive relative to what people earn? And then when you start reading about fiat money and debt and all the rest of it, suddenly it all made sense. And it was one of my sort of eureka moments, if you like. And there were all these really interesting people talking about gold. And I was like, I really would like to talk to these people, but I don't want to pay them £200 or £300 an hour, whatever their hourly fee is, consultancy. So I did what a lot of people did. This is very early in those days. I started a podcast as an excuse to talk to these people. I had all the wherewithal because, I was working in studios and all the rest of it. And then the podcast proved very popular. And the first person I interviewed was James Turk, and then David Morgan, and then Jim Rogers, the legendary commodities trader, former partner of George Soros. And I was like, wow, these big names are quite happy to come and talk on your podcast because, they all want to get whatever their message is out. And podcasting is like a heightened form of a conversation. And within an hour of a podcast with somebody, you get to know them much more quickly than you would maybe over 2 or 3 weeks, just intermittent contact with them. It's a heightened, it accelerates everything. And so I sort of fell in love with the form, and the podcast became very popular because it turned out there were lots of people like me who didn't really understand what were going on, and they enjoyed hearing all these people. Anyway, one of the people I interviewed was this lady called Merrin Somerset Webb, who is the editor of Money Week, which is the UK's best-selling weekly publication, financial publication. And she said, "Oh, we need people like you. Will you come and write for us about gold and commodities?" And I was like, "Well, I don't really think I know what I'm talking about, Merrin. I'm just a comedian and a voiceover artist." And she said, no, it doesn't matter. You'll be really good." And suddenly I had this weekly column, and the column was very popular. And I think one of the reasons it was popular is that when you're from the world of finance, it almost pays not to be clear. It pays to obfuscate. Alan Greenspan used to talk about purposeful obfuscation. But when you're a comedian, if the audience doesn't understand what you're saying, they do not laugh, and so you die. And so that very quickly forces the discipline of clarity onto the comedian. And so I think I brought that sort of instinct for clarity into my blog and my podcast, and people really liked it, and that's why it proved popular. And so then the financial crisis came along, and I was like, gold, gold, gold. And this guy called Ross Ashcroft approached me, and he said, "I've made this film about the financial crisis called Four Horsemen, and I've interviewed all these big people, but it's not working. Can you fix it?" And I went to look at it, and it was a total mess. But I was able to rewrite it for him, and I got him some more interviews. And one of the things I said to him is, look, if you're making a film about the finance, everything that's gone wrong with the financial markets, you need something about money, about fiat money. And so I got him in touch with David Morgan and James Turk and Hugo Salinas Price and various other people. And he interviewed all of them. And we made all these little animations about fiat money and how broken the system was. And we put them in the film. We put them on YouTube. They did very well. I think they're still on YouTube now. You could see them. And anyway, then we went and made the film Four Horsemen. And Ross and I ended up falling out over that film. But it was extraordinarily popular, the film, and it made me realize just how much this stuff is chiming with people. And around about this time, we're now in sort of 2011, 2012, people were emailing me, or because I was sort of well known in the gold space, people were emailing me, "You've got to look at this new thing called Bitcoin. It's just fantastic." And actually, I was so deep writing Four Horsemen, I didn't give it the proper attention that it deserved. But after Four Horsemen was done, I realized that, it gave me a lot of confidence in my ability to do stuff. So I wrote my first book, which was called Life After the State. And the main argument of that book was that if we're going to fix the world, we need to fix money. And I think that book there's like a little page on Bitcoin in that book, because it was just starting to gather traction as I was writing it. And so I think the mention of Bitcoin in that book might be the first kind of mention about Bitcoin in a proper, book from a regular publisher. And so literally as that book was published, Bitcoin was coming out, and I was like, here is the free market giving us an answer to all these problems with fiat money. So I very quickly sat down and wrote another book, Bitcoin, the Future of Money. I think, look, you can see there's the poster for it there. And I'm pretty sure that was the first book from a recognized publisher about Bitcoin. And this was 2014. And it came out in the first, what was dubbed the crypto winter. It came out when Bitcoin had gone to $1,200, and then it fell all the way back to $200. And so that's when that book came out. And then, and in those days, people would just, they were so keen to get you involved in Bitcoin. They would just send you Bitcoins for nothing. And so they were all flying around. And unfortunately, I didn't take proper precautions, and I got hacked. And so I lost a lot of my Bitcoins back in, would be 2014, the year after that it hit 1,200. And so that, so I regard myself as an OG, but not an OG who's made as much money as Roger Ver, if that makes sense. And anyway, so I've been on the edge of the space ever since. And then this progressed to the point where I was like, okay, we've got Bitcoin now. The free market is providing the solution to the money problem. And then I started thinking, and then the next stage in my thinking was that if you can imagine, was tax. And now tax and money are very correlated, and inflation the debasement of currency is in itself a tax. It's a stealth tax. Milton Friedman called it taxation without legislation. But the next stage in my thinking was that like if you watch a zombie film, there's always this idea of the zero patient, which is a, you know, the hero of the zombie. This is the patient where the virus started. And the hero of the zombie film has to get to patient zero and either kill him, or patient zero will give him the antidote by which he can save the world. And I used to think that society's patient zero is its system of money. And I've slightly expanded that now, that society's patient zero is its system of tax. Now, let me just qualify that a little bit, because there has never been a civilization at any point in history that did not involve taxation of some kind. And it's likely that this idea of a sense of duty to the greater collective even existed in the hunter-gatherer societies that predated civilization. And this idea of you giving a tenth of what you earn, you know, in ancient Mesopotamia, we didn't really use money. There were bits of gold, but coins didn't exist then. So people would give a tenth of their labor or a tenth of their produce. The tithe, you know, it's Christianity thinks it's a Christian thing, but it's way older than Christianity. And they call it the tithe because they think it's a tenth because we have 10 fingers in. It was an easy amount to calculate. I don't know if that's true, but that's one of the theories. But you design a society by the way that you tax it. And you determine the destiny of that society, whether its people are going to be prosperous or poor, free or subordinated, by the way that you tax it. So, you know, there are good taxes and bad taxes. There are voluntary taxes. Ancient Greece had voluntary taxes. And a taxation is like a measure of freedom. In a totalitarian state, it's sort of 75, 80% taxation. Workers don't own their own labor. In an anarchy, total freedom, which I'm not convinced has ever really existed, you know, workers own all of their own labor. And in the sort of social democracies of today, we're sort of somewhere in the middle of the two stools. If you include, you know, it's about 50% of everything you ever earn is taken from you in taxes, roughly. It's a bit less in America, it's a bit more in Europe. And tax is power. If a king or an emperor or a government, whatever the ruler is, loses its tax revenue, it loses its power. And so, as I said, I include money as part of that idea of taxation. So it's this incredibly important subject. And yet nobody thinks, you know, politicians, we're going to do this policy, we're going to do that. People argue about this and the other. And I kind of go, if we fixed our system of tax, everything else follows. And I said there's never been a civilization without taxation. Even in something like Bitcoin or Decred, which is essentially a voluntary system, there are still taxes. You know, you pay your transaction fees, you pay your mining fees, and the amount you pay, you can pay more if you like, if you want the transaction to go through quickly. You know, so that even in a essentially voluntary system like cryptocurrencies, there are still taxes. And once you start to look at the world through this prism of taxation, suddenly everything makes sense. And my big argument is there's never been an event in history, a great event. You can take pretty much any great event from history and you will find a tax story behind that event, without which that event would have unfolded very differently. Every single war was funded by taxes of some kind, either during the event or after. You plunder and then you tax. Every conquest was about taking control of the tax base, the land, the labor, the produce, the profits. Every revolution is a rising up against some kind of injustice perpetrated by the tax system. Even things like the birth of Christ, you know, Mary and Joseph were only in Bethlehem to pay taxes. The first men on the moon, well, NASA was a tax-funded operation. And most religions, you know, involve taxes, because in the old days, the difference between king and God was not that clear, you know. And even today, you know, the in today's sort of secular states, like in England, the NHS, in a funny kind of way, has become a religion. It's like replaced Christianity. And Christianity used to be the main provider of welfare, or the church used to be the main provider. Now that's become the state. And now people worship the welfare state. So it's this bizarre. So that's kind of who I am. And I think in the course of telling you who I am, and so my final book was this one, Daylight Robbery, which was all about the past, the present, and future attacks. And that's what I'm basically pitching to Decred about. So hopefully I've told you who I am and a bit about tax as well. I might have answered about 3 of your questions in that long ramble.
Yeah, yes, you did. I have to keep muting myself because there's noise in the background. So when you talk, I just mute myself so that it doesn't pick up. But yes, you did answer about 3 of my questions. So that actually helps us a bunch, and gets us to, you know, I actually want to say I can definitely attest to the podcasting. That's how I got started with the Decred in depth, and so I definitely attest to what you said there. But anyways, can you tell us a little bit about how you found Decred, and then maybe have a little bit of a conversation about why Decred versus Bitcoin?
Yeah, I can tell you exactly how I found Decred, and the answer is John Matonis, who's a buddy of mine. And do you know who I mean by John Matonis? Okay, so John Matonis was, I think he was the first, I'm going to get this wrong, but it was either the first chairman or the first president of the, oh God, what was it called? Not the Bitcoin Association, the Bitcoin Foundation. He was the first, like, number one at the Bitcoin Foundation. And he's an old friend of mine. And I set up this company about 2 or 3 years ago called Cypherpunk Holdings, which is listed on the CSE, the Canadian Securities Exchange, obviously in Canada. And we set it up specifically to invest in privacy technology. Somebody approached me. He had a shell of a company with some cash in it, and he wanted to do a Bitcoin company. And I said, don't do a Bitcoin company because you'll just buy Bitcoins and hold Bitcoins, and there'll be, sooner or later, there'll be a Bitcoin ETF, and it's just not worth it. I didn't realize how long it would take there to be a Bitcoin ETF. But anyway, so I said, set something up to be around privacy, because that's much more interesting. And, privacy is going to be the next big, one of the huge themes of the 2020s, this argument about how we've given our privacy away and we do not realize it. And all the ways by which Google and Facebook and all these other companies know stuff about you without you realizing. And that information in the wrong hands, a malevolent government or a crook or whatever it is, it's very, very dangerous. And there's going to be a pushback over the next decade as people start to understand privacy. So we wrote all this stuff about privacy and we set this company up. And then I was having lunch with John and I said to him, I've got this company, and I did the presentation of the company, and John obviously understands all the arguments about the importance of privacy and the relationship between privacy and freedom. I just find that that's so important. And John was like, I'd really like to get involved with this company. And like he's a proper OG and he held on to his Bitcoin. So he doesn't need the money. But anyway, John came on and became chief economist of this company. And then we would have a meeting, me, John, and a chap called Mohammed Adam, who was the chief investment officer. And once a week, we'd have these weekly meetings and we'd discuss developments in privacy technology and what things we should be investing in. And originally, we set up this thing called the Privacy Coin Index, which was an index of the main privacy coins. So we had, Bitcoin, Monero, Grin, Decred was in there, Bitcoin Cash was in there for various reasons, which I'll explain. Grin, what's that other one begins with a B? I forget what they were. Dash was in there. And we ranked them in terms of we had 5 criteria for ranking the various coins. And so Bitcoin would get 5 in terms of adoption, but it would only get 1 because it's actually not that private. Whereas something like Monero would get 5 for privacy and it would get like 2 or 3 for adoption. And something like Grin would get 5% for privacy, but it would get, 1%, 1 for adoption. And we invented this index that ranked all the various privacy coins based on various narratives. And John and Mo at the time kept going, we really need to look at Decred. Cypherpunk Holdings should have a position in Decred because the technical guys at Decred are like top dollar. They're the best in the business. And so that's how I find out about Decred, was John and Mo and these meetings. And then I just bought some. Basically, I bought some, and I really like the wallet, and I really like the user experience, and I mean, I really like the wallet, and I really like the staking. And you get your stake, and you buy your tickets, and you get your little bit of Decred, and then your tickets come good, and then you have to re-buy the tickets and so on. And I just like the whole. I like the whole user experience, and ideologically, I really like Decred because it's you know, it's got all the same stuff about privacy that I hold as very important. But it's technologically it's really good. But the sort of the governance, the DAO thing, is like going one stage further than where Bitcoin and a lot of the other coins have gone. And you know, the problem with a lot of those, you know, Bitcoin alternatives is they're a bit you know, there's always something that's wrong with them. You know, you can find this one and go, oh, well, that one's got this problem and this one's got this one. And Decred, the only problem I could really find was the lack of awareness, you know, the lack of network. Apart from that, you know, technologically and everything else, it was pretty sound. And, you know, I remember going to that Anarchy conference in Mexico, Anarchapulco, a couple of years ago, and listening to a talk by a Monero maximalist. And I just loved it. And I was like, I'm totally on board with you, mate. But the problem that Monero's got is that it's too readily associated with the dark net. And that's something that people have been able to smear Bitcoin with over the years. And so it's good that Decred doesn't have that association. But at the same time, Monero, you know, black markets have a long history of being the first to embrace new technology and make it work on a practical day-to-day basis. They don't have deep pools of venture capital or debt that they can fall back on, so they have to make stuff work and make it work quickly. So the fact that the black markets were using Monero and Bitcoin is testament to the fact that it worked. But if you're looking to get widespread mainstream adoption, then maybe that's not an association that you want. So that's how I came to be involved with Decred. And
I think this is a good time to jump in because you talked about the awareness. What is your opinion on the current state of Decred marketing? And we'll start to transition a little bit into talking about some of the solutions that you're proposing for this awareness. How do you see your film as solving some of these weaknesses?
Well, one of the reasons that Doge has been so successful, and also GameStop, was the meme thing. You know, there were people doing songs about Doge on TikTok, and you know, they were getting millions and millions of views. And I was just amazed at the power that these memes have. And obviously Bitcoin memes have been great from the word go. And so I think that's somewhere that Decred should be exploring. It's not somewhere that I can particularly help. I think I'm from the wrong generation for memes, but I think there's a meme chat on Elements, and I follow that and I enjoy watching it, but it's not that noisy. So, you know, if I was, you know, head of marketing at Decred, one of the things I would be beating the thing on was more memes, more memes. We need to get more people doing memes. But I think the thing about memes is they're sort of a self-reinforcing thing. Is the bigger the network, the more the memes spread. So I'm not sure if it's the memes make the network grow or the network makes the memes grow. So GameStop memes only really became a thing when GameStop, you know, had that huge impetus behind it at the beginning of this year. So that's one thing I'd be doing. Of a highbrow thing, but that's not, when I say that's one thing I'd be doing if I were, you know, as I say, head of marketing at Decred. But that's not anywhere I can help. You heard me go on that launch on that big talk about taxation and why it's so important, and this is all stuff I'd like to communicate in that film. And by the way, I've got a taster of the film that we recorded about a year ago, and I'm going to be putting it on the Politeia proposal later in the week. I've actually got my dad's wake tomorrow, and so this week, and I had a big day on something else. So this week, my attention is not going to be on the Politeia proposal until probably later in the week when I can give it my attention again. But there's three things I'm going to be doing on that. Is one, I'll be writing more about tax, why it's such an important subject, and why I think a film about tax could be so popular. Secondly, I'll put a more detailed budget up there so that people can understand exactly, rather than just a budget per minute, people can understand exactly where the money would go. And thirdly, I think a lot of people don't realize just how expensive it is to make a quality film. And the third thing I'll be doing is I've got a little taster that we shot a year or two ago, and we're just tweaking it and putting the Decred logo on it so that people can get a better idea of what this film will look like. But my basic idea, there's off the top of my head, three ways by which I think this film will benefit Decred and raise awareness of it. And let me stress, this is a film wearing my serious financial writer's hat, not my irreverent comic songs hat. So I won't be swearing, I won't be doing stupid songs or jokes. This will be a serious, highbrow documentary. It'd be more like Four Horsemen than it will be like it will be like a sort of presenter-led Four Horsemen than it will be like any of the comic songs that I put up. So one way that I hope Decred will benefit is as a sponsor. So I think people who'd be interested in this film are the same people that will be potentially interested in Decred. And so by having a little message about Decred at the beginning of the film, at the end of the film, and the Decred logo on it, it will be a little bit like, you know, I don't know. I use this analogy. It's a bit crap, the analogy, but it'll be a bit like a beer company sponsoring a sporting event. And so there will be that, you know, people who watch sport drink beer, and this beer will be associated with that event. So it raises awareness. People watching that sporting event become more aware of that beer. So it's just the old-fashioned advertiser-sponsor relationship. So that's one way by which I think Decred will benefit. Secondly, Decred will effectively be the publisher, the broadcaster of this film. It won't be the broadcaster in the sense that the film won't be broadcast on the Decred. You know, Decred doesn't have its own well, it sort of has its own broadcast channel, but it won't be on like, you know, BBC Decred or ABC. It won't be the broadcaster in that sense, but it would be the broadcaster in the sense that it made it happen. And, you know, HBO or Penguin or whatever the publisher or the broadcaster is benefits when it puts out good content. More people are aware of who the publisher is. The reputational advantages of the publisher also increase. So that's the second way by which I think Decred will benefit. And the third way by which I think Decred will, actually there's two more ways. The third way by which I hope Decred will benefit is that I think the idea of this first DAO, like most people don't even know what a DAO is, and they would struggle to understand what a DAO is, in the same way that you know, people are resolutely opposed to Bitcoin because they go, oh, I don't understand what it is. It's almost willful ignorance, that one. And there's a wonderful Satoshi quote where he said something like, well, if you're determined not to understand it, I haven't got any time to explain it to you, or something like that. He said it was a great quote. But anyway, the idea of a first DAO funded documentary that has no intellectual copyright, no intellectual property on it, it's released into the Creative Commons, it's freely available. I think that is a unique and quite special event, not just some cheap old video that I release into the Creative Commons of me, you know, filming my cat or something. I mean, a proper highbrow, well-made film, freely available. I think that's a groundbreaking event. And, you know, if the PR is right, and you never know with PR, but and the mood is right at the time, that has the potential to make a big media splash and get a lot of people talking. It's a bit like, you know, how the internet made everything free in the late 90s, early noughties, and all the newspaper companies were like, oh my God, what do we do? They just didn't know how to handle this free thing. And I think this is a sort of evolution of that. And as Decred being the person that made it happen, I think Decred would there would be a lot of increased awareness of Decred. There would be a lot of increased awareness of DAOs. And so, and almost if we can make a big media splash about that, I think that's almost the way that Decred benefits most in terms of awareness, because that's where the most hype will be. Obviously, if the film's good and the more people that watch it, the more people will become aware of Decred. And then the fourth way by which Decred will benefit, and I was resistant to this at first, was that, so in my film, I talk about the future of taxation, where the nation state is going, and we can talk about this in a second. But, you know, the digital nomad is the fastest growing workforce in the world, or it was before COVID. And in a bizarre way, COVID has both accelerated digital nomadery and slowed it. It's accelerated it in the sense that it has normalized remote working. So more and more people are working remotely. For example, I had a conversation with my solicitor the other day, and I was like, "Where are you?" And he said, and he's supposed to be a central London solicitor. And he said, "I'm in the south of France." And I was like, "How long have you been there for?" And he was, "Well, a year." And so he's basically been running his central London legal practice from his house in the Dordogne. But anyway, so it's normalized remote working. So, and one hopes that, but what it has done obviously is it's slowed down travel. But the digital nomad, Ernst & Young have estimated that by 2030, as much as half of the US workforce will be contingent. And, you know, the gig economy, freelancers, whatever word you want to use, more and more moonlighting, more and more people are becoming freelance. And at the same time, once you start working remotely, working freelance, then you think, "Oh, I've got to get out of the house." So you start walking from the cafe, and then you go, "Do you know what? I don't need to be in central. I don't need to be in central New York. I can go and live in Florida or Texas. It's half the price." Or, "Do you know what? I'll go down and I'll live in Mexico, or I'll go and live in El Salvador." And so more and more people are doing it. It's becoming more and more normal. They're working in the borderless medium that is the internet. They're being paid in borderless money. And so this is a huge growing workforce. And there's an estimate from a chap called Peter, I'm sorry, I forget his surname, that by 2035, there'll be 9 billion people in the world, of which there'll be 6 billion workers. Of those 6 billion workers, if you take the Ernst & Young projections, maybe as many as 3 billion will be freelancers of some kind. And of those freelancers of some kind, 1 billion, 1/3, will be digital nomads. Now, so it's an extraordinarily, that might have slow because of the border thing, but, you know, 1 billion digital nomads by 2035, that's within basically half a generation. And income tax is the largest source of government revenue worldwide. 50% of government revenue worldwide derives from income tax. It's much harder to collect. It's been proven time and time again that freelance workers doing the same job as workers working for a company pay much lower levels of tax. There's more scope for non-compliance, either deliberate or accidental. They find more expenses to write off. The taxes are collected not at source, but after the event. All these reasons contribute to, now if we've got this huge digital nomad workforce, that's going to put extraordinary pressure on government revenue, because its income tax, its largest source of revenue, is going to be prejudiced. If you're a digital nomad and you're hired to do a job in Cartagena by a company that's in Brazil, you actually complete the job while you're in Chiang Mai, and then you're in Lisbon when you get paid. Who do you pay tax to? It just isn't clear. The tax systems are designed around a physical economy, physical movement of physical workers and physical goods that has been made redundant by the internet. And the tax systems haven't moved with the times. And one of the consequences of this is going to be that nation states are going to go bankrupt, because at the same time as their tax revenue is prejudiced, they're spending more and more and taking on more and more obligations, especially with COVID. So it's straight out of the sovereign individual, this situation. But, you know, I'm going to describe this in the film in shorter. but you've got people using cryptocurrency, so government can't control and regulate the money. The workers are not going to be in any fixed jurisdiction, so government can't control the worker. And so that's the world that we're going into, and that's a world where systems like Decred and Bitcoin are going to do very well. I would have thought already. I think 50% of digital nomads use cryptocurrency. It'll be much higher, and I think because of this, we're going into a huge economic boom, but it's going to be a boom that's much harder for governments to get its hands on. And there will actually be competitions between governments to attract these wealthy digital nomad workers. There'll be Portugal's already doing it, all sorts of tax incentives to El Salvador, get digital nomads to come. And so, yeah, that's the world that we're going into. And then the next evolution of that is, governments have found it really difficult to tax Google and Facebook and even Starbucks, these multinational jurisdictions that put their intellectual property here and their profits there and their actual workings in this place. The tax systems just can't cope with international currencies because tax systems are designed around nation states. What happens when we get digital autonomous organizations that aren't based anywhere? Like, how do you tax and regulate them? You can't. And one of the reasons the internet has exploded in the way that it has is that it's been ahead of government regulation. It's been a wild west. People operating on the internet haven't had to pay the same level of taxes as people in the physical economy. As a result, they haven't had that leakage, as some people call it. They've been able to reinvest far greater levels of capital. There's been far greater growth as a result. The whole thing is a reinforcing cycle. Well, the same thing's going to happen with DAOs. And so this is going to be a huge theme in the section of the film that deals with the future of taxation. And Decred is the first DAO that's made it happen. So for all these reasons, Decred's going to feature in the film. Now, I was resistant to doing that at first because I thought, well, if the film's sponsored by Decred and then the last third of the film features Decred, it's just going to look a bit compromised and look a bit biased. But I think the arguments will be so strong that I will be able to deal with that. So those are the ways by which I hope Decred will benefit from this film.
Yes, thank you for that. You've answered many of my questions as we've been going along. And so I think where I want to take this right now is I want to talk about sort of the implications of this being the first open source DAO funded documentary, along with what does a DAO funded film allow you to accomplish that traditional funding methods do not? And if you can also continue on, you've sort of started to answer it. To what degree or how much Decred content are you imagining? You talked about sort of the future of work, and if you can just sort of maybe talk about those three things.
Well, I'm really interested in history. And I'm really interested in this idea that there is an alternate tax story between many great ideas in history. So a large part of the film is going to focus on history. And, Decred is the future. It's not history, it's the present and the future. So it's not going to play that big a role in originally I had this as 3 1-hour films. And the first hour was history, the second hour was the present, and the third hour was the future. That was how I originally did it. But for various reasons, you've read all the stuff. I've just gone, let's just make it one film. I think it's more likely to make a media splash that way. The budget's lower, all those reasons. But so Decred will feature very strongly. I would imagine, let's say it's a 90-minute film, or let's say it's a 100-minute film. Maybe the first 40 or 50% would be history, the first 40 or 50 minutes, and the next 20 minutes would be now, where we are now. And then the last, I've lost count of my maths, that 40, so let's say the last 30 minutes would be the future. The last third would be the future, something like that. Maybe the last 25%. And, Decred will feature very strongly in it because we can use it as a use case example. you know, this is what Decred is doing, this is how it came about, and it's doing this, that, and the other. And, you know, I find when you write books and make films and so on, stories, individual stories are more powerful. If you tell the individual story and then at the end of it say, this is the implications of that story, it's a more powerful thing than just saying, this is what's going to happen, if that makes sense. You look at all Malcolm Gladwell and all those writers who do extraordinarily well with their books. They always start with a story and then they demonstrate the wider implications of that story. So, and then of course there's going to be the Decred logo on it, and the, you know, maybe even a 30-second message about Decred at the beginning of the end of the film. So that's within the film itself, and then there's the media splash around it. Does that answer your question?
It perfectly does. And I'm just kind of scrolling through the questions here because a lot of them are being answered, and I don't want you to be repeating yourself necessarily. So I want to make sure that this is a good one. Do you see, this one came from Twitter. I can't remember who asked this, but do you see any irony in an anti-tax film being funded by what is essentially a tax on the Decred protocol?
I see a lot of irony in that statement. And it's, you know, in the UK, we have the National Theatre, and that's sponsored by the government. It gets government subsidy. This is effectively subsidized arts, if you like. So I do see that irony. I would stress I'm anti-taxes in the way that they currently exist. But I also, like Benjamin Franklin and various others, recognize the inevitability of taxes. As I said to you before, there's never been a civilization without taxation of some kind. But there have been civilizations where taxation was voluntary. And that's a really important difference. The taxes we pay to Decred or to Bitcoin in terms of fees and so on, those are essentially voluntary taxes. If you want to use the system, you pay them the money, but you're not a, it's different from having your money taken from you at source and then you having very little say on how that money is spent, which is currently how social democracies run today. You know, your only say on how that money is spent is your vote every 5 years, which is, as we all know, fairly ineffective. The Decred governance system of voting is far more effective. You're walking somewhere and it looks very menacing, Eduardo, the way that you're walking.
Yes.
Like you're about to go and
I am moving, and they can't actually see that. Only you can see that, but it's because my computer's about to die. You feature prominently right now in the live stream, so I just want to make sure that my computer doesn't die. But
okay,
since
I've got you. So
I want to.
So I do just to answer that question, I do recognize that irony, but the film isn't anti-tax. It will recognize the inevitability of taxes, but it is anti-bad taxes, or what I consider to be bad taxes, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. Yeah, and you kind of talked about that earlier too, when you were talking, you know, sort of the history of taxation. But this question comes from Checkmate. He asks, can you compare the different taxation models of Bitcoin, Decred, and Ethereum, and how you view those?
Well, I would rank them, and like there are guys who understand mining fees and gas fees and all the rest of it better than me. And I've got a feeling a lot of them are going to be watching this interview now. So I'm reluctant to hold court on it, because except to say general stuff, which is like, I find Ethereum gas fees, like you see me shaking my head here. Like I sold a couple of NFTs. I made these stupid projections that I put on buildings and I sold them as NFTs. And so much of the profit from selling these NFTs was eaten up in gas fees. It was like, I think at one point it was like $40 a transaction or something. And I'm like, how can that be possible? So in terms of the ranking of Ethereum, Bitcoin, and Decred, I would rank Ethereum worst. Bitcoin fees, there are different levels of fees you can pay, but on the whole, Decred's fees are cheaper. And so I'm going to rank Decred top because I like the staking thing, which Bitcoin doesn't have. One of the things John Matonis used to say when we were at Cypherpunk Holdings, I forgot to mention, was that the good things from so we had this privacy coin index. I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but we had this privacy coin index. And then after a bit, we abandoned it because we decided, you know what? John and Mo were kind of Bitcoin maximalists. And they said, you know what? The whatever's good in the other coins will be adopted in layers. And so we ended up investing in Wasabi Wallet and Samurai Wallet and a couple of other privacy protocols because we thought they were privacy layers that were going to be added to the Bitcoin network. But so we sort of became Bitcoin maximalists for a bit, but I'm sort of less of a Bitcoin maximalist now. They're probably more maximalist than I am, those two. I'm very pro Decred. And it just sort of, as I keep saying, it kind of incorporates everything. So on the ranking list, Decred first, Bitcoin second, Ethereum third. There are technical guys who are going to be able to break that down and provide actual evidence of fees and what the costs are and what you get and what the reward is better than me.
Apologies.
Is that your kid?
It's my niece. Like I said, we're on family holiday, yeah. So there's a lot of moving parts right now. But the themes of the film, money, governance, liberty, align with the ethos of Decred. Can you talk briefly about the merger of these communities, and particularly, can you talk about why you believe the incentives are properly aligned between Decred and your film?
I can. The first part of that question I don't quite understand, but I'm just going to talk for a bit and hopefully I'll answer it. I recognize the inevitability of taxes, but there are good taxes and bad taxes. And I think Decred as a governance model is pretty good with the combination of the fees you pay, but the staking and the rewards and Politeia and all the governance and the Decred treasury and the way the treasury is allocated. I think that's a pretty good system of governance. And were a nation to replicate that, I think it would be a pretty competitive nation in terms of what it produces and how free and happy its people are. And also a very loyal nation. You tend to find, I think the early soldiers of the Roman Republic gave their service freely because they were so loyal. And then by the end of the Roman Republic, it was relying on mercenaries. And you look at, the patriotism that there was with Britain in the 19th century or America in the early 20th century. There was people gave their lives. They went to war for their country. They still do now. But I don't believe that there is the same loyalty to one's country that one felt. There's almost like the more taxes there are, the less loyal. The lower the taxes and the more freely they're given, the more loyal the people. So, and I think that's why, again, you've got this sort of, Michael Saylor talks about the swarms of cyber hornets in Bitcoin. And over the course of this proposal, I've encountered a few cyber hornets of my own. And so, but I think that loyalty is a consequence of the Decred governance model. And so, but, the tax model that, I would have land value taxes, by the way, in a physical society, but that doesn't apply to a virtual society. But yeah, the Decred governance model works really well. And so, why don't nation states copy it? That's an argument we could make in the film. And so that's an example of how philosophically we're aligned. I believe in apolitical state-free money. I think privacy is vitally important. I think we've given our privacy away and we don't realize what we've done. I think, the whole stake, all these things, I'm intellectually aligned with Decred. And because of that intellectual alignment, if I'm making a film and it's popular and lots of people watch it and Decred sponsor it, and people who watch that film are the sort of people who'll be interested in Decred. You know, I'm raising awareness of Decred, but I'm also raising awareness of themes, of philosophies, of ways of thinking and living and governing, which are aligned to those of Decred. So that's why what I mean when I say there's this convergence of interest. The other convergence of interest is, you know, it is pretty transparent. I do want to make a film of my book. You know, I'm quite passionate about that as a simple artist. I'm not going to pretend that this is something I want to do. I want to have as much control over the content as I possibly can. And if there's a commissioner from the BBC constantly breathing down my neck and going, "Oh, we can't say that, we can't say that," that's a nightmare for a creator. Whereas Decred, I imagine, would be much more. Once I've secured the funds, I don't believe, I have the reporting, but I don't believe Decred's going to be saying you can't say that, you can't say that the whole time. So I think I have more creative control with this model, and so there is that. But the more successful my film is, the better my film is, and I think it will be more successful the more creative control I have, the more Decred benefits, because the better the film is, the more people will watch it. And the more people that watch the film, the more people that become aware of Decred. Do you see what I mean? So that's that's what I mean when I talk about the virtual interest, alignment of interests.
Absolutely. And you properly, my question was not the best worded, but you definitely answered it. So thank you for that. And you mentioned the cyber hornets. I guess this is a great time to ask a question that comes from Checkmate. How has the proposal process and dialogue with anon stakeholders changed your view of the project? Does the debate and strong will to defend a common good, the stakeholder treasury, add conviction to the DAO?
Well, the answer is yes, it does. And I have been surprised at some of the stuff that's been said on there. And I won't lie to you, I've been quite hurt by some of the things that have been said. I feel I've been quite badly smeared and misrepresented. And, somebody having doubts about the project and not being convinced or not thinking it's right for Decred and all the rest of it, fair enough. But there's a couple of times when people have gone too far. Now, I recognize it's the nature of the thing, and I'm posting as who I am, but other people are posting anonymously. I think there's a bit of sock puppeting has gone on as well, by the way. But I also recognize the need for anonymity to the relationship. Like, a lot of people talk about, we need Twitter. You need to be a certified user to use Twitter. And I actually think in order for ideas to develop, Bitcoin would not have happened without an anonymity. There is a need for online anonymity, and I recognize that, and I'm kind of on the wrong side of it. And I found, like, my mother got involved in a really horrible law case with her ex-husband a few years ago, and there was a big fight over money. And I watched her ex-husband's solicitors, lawyers, attorneys, to use the American word, work, and how they how they just took. So they'd take, here's the cup, and this is what happened, but they just take one bit of the cup, this bit of the cup here, and ignore all of this. And just by using this one little bit of evidence, they didn't lie, but they were able to construe a completely different reality that was so far from the truth. It was like, that is so intellectually dishonest. How can you do that? And I felt that same dynamic going on with the way some of what I said in the Politeia proposal, the way it was misconstrued. I was accused of lying and all sorts of other stuff. And I'm like, I'm a pretty honest bloke. And so I was quite hurt and quite upset by that. But I also recognize, and also I felt that it was another guy who wanted to do something creative, pissed off that somebody else had stolen a march on him and wanted to prevent that guy doing anything creative because he was pissed off about it. That's what I felt was the motive of it. But that all aside, I think it is ultimately good that these arguments are being had, because if you don't have these arguments, the truth will not out. And I recognize the need for online anonymity, and I recognize the need to rigorously argue with every point made in the proposal, because if you don't rigorously argue with everything and debate it and discuss it, that is how you cleave to the truth. But so there's a slight ambivalence, but ultimately the good outweighs the bad.
Yeah, I think that was a very fair, in interpretation of things that happened. And like you said, like there's good and bad, and like the need for anonymity, but then it also kind of creates an avenue for people to easily attack you, and kind of sock puppet, if you will. So I completely agree. Again, moving through these questions, and we're coming towards the end here. A lot of these, I don't want you to be redundant. So some of these you've been answering as we go. And I hope that the stakeholders, even if your question has not been directly asked, you've probably heard the answer if you've listened to the entire interview. Can stakeholders expect the film to be politically neutral?
That depends on what you mean by politically neutral, because a lot of people view, the mainstream views politics through this stupid prism of left and right. And I just, anyone who argues for less state is suddenly right wing. But to me, right wing means more state. Mussolini was right wing. And so I think this left and right prism is just stupid. And I tend to view things much more through an authoritarian and libertarian prism. So if you are asking me, is it going to be left or right? I will say it is going to be neither. It is going to be neutral. But if you're asking me, is this film going to argue for more authoritarianism or more libertarianism, then I'm afraid this film is going to be biased to the libertarian side of the argument.
Thank you for that answer. That was brilliant. If your proposal is funded, what is your go-to-market strategy? How do you plan to get the film in front of as many eyes as possible? Netflix, Prime, iTunes, Vudu, etc.? Question mark.
Yeah, this is a big issue, and I'm not entirely sure what the answer is yet. I've got an idea, and it's not an easy answer. Distribution is where personally I am weakest. But let me just talk for a little bit, and hopefully some of the answers will become clear. Now, if you fund an independent film, because of this basically is going to have no intellectual copyright, it's going to be free to all, in a funny kind of way, bizarrely, that limits its distribution. It'll be freely available on all various platforms on the internet, YouTube and Rumble and Vimeo and whatever other platforms are. But if, for example, and we can upload it to Amazon, and so it will become available on Amazon Prime, but the goalposts around distribution change all the time. So, for example, you used to be able to upload your video to Google Play, and you would then sell it, and for a fee. And I think you used to be able to do that with iTunes. What was Apple Movies before in the iTunes store? Now, in order to get it on Google Play or the iTunes store, you have to go through a distributor. So you would now distributors operate on a commission. So, it might be 25% or whatever of the film makes, whatever the commission is, but this is free. So the distributor's role is kind of redundant, because I want 25% of nothing. So you would have to go to one of those paid distributors where you pay them $1,500 or a couple of $1,000. I can't remember their names, but there are lots of them, and they then distribute your film.
We're almost done, Dad.
Whatever. Okay, and they have various quality controls. So the fact that this film is freely available is almost a problem in terms of distribution to Google Play and Apple Movies and so on. Amazon, I'm not sure what the latest thing is, but I think you can upload it to Amazon. But then again, Amazon would want to charge a fee for you to watch the film, and this is free. So again, it's sort of, and also a lot of these companies are going to want a DAO funded film on their platform. They might see that as a threat. So all these things are going to be issues going forward, and I'm not sure what the answer is yet. I'm inclined to say at the moment the answer is make it freely available on the internet and people will watch it. Netflix, they have various gatekeepers. They might take it. The UK Netflix is different to the US Netflix, but again, getting stuff on Netflix and actually people watching it on Netflix are two very different things, because people tend to watch on Netflix the stuff that appears on the first page, and getting your film to appear on the first page is not that easy. So unless Netflix is specifically pushing it, but if Netflix haven't commissioned it, or they're not making money out of it because it's freely available, they do benefit because they have it on their platform and people using their platform. But so it's not entirely clear how the film will go through the traditional viewing platforms, aside of, all the free to view platforms. It is a complex area, and I don't have the solution yet, and it is problematic. But that said, when Four Horsemen came out, like Alex, my co-director, let me just get this email. He put a video up. He made a film with a guy called Mike Yeadon, who was very cynical about COVID policies. And it was called Mike Yeadon Unlocked. And he made another one, with Dr. John Lee, Is the Cure Worse Than the Disease? And the Yeadon film was deleted off YouTube within 8 hours because it had COVID wrongthink in it. And it still managed to get over 2 million views on other platforms, Facebook and Rumble, and I don't even know what the other ones were. So, and that was just basically a long interview with one guy. So there is still plenty of ways by which you can get people watching this film without it necessarily having to be on Netflix. I'm not saying it won't be on Netflix. I'm just saying I'm not sure how willing those platforms will be to fund a film that is the what's the word, when it's the pioneer in a new type of filmmaking, which effectively that makes their model redundant.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And thank you for explaining that. It is a very complex sort of, I guess, interaction between different incentives. Um, my
Film
last question,
distribution is it's full of gatekeepers. It's just one gatekeeper after another. And the idea of this film is that we get rid of gatekeepers.
yeah, it was funny as I was reading through the Politeia discussion, realizing how little I know about the film industry. I
Oh,
was like,
it's
it seems
really
like
hard.
there's a lot of people, yeah, a lot of people have their hands put into a lot of different aspects. Um, Marketing is by nature a little bit nebulous. Um, how should the Decred community measure success from an endeavor like this? Are there any particular metrics we could use or that we should be looking at?
I don't know. I haven't thought about it, but as you asked me that question, a figure came into my head, and that figure was 1 million views. I don't know why that. I don't base that on anything. It just came into my head. So, but I guess we gauge the success of the film of the number of views it has over a given period, and maybe 1 million views is the threshold of, if it gets less than 1 million. I don't know. I mean, that interview I did with Jake on the Decred on YouTube, I think it only had like 3,000 or 4,000 views, but I thought it was terrific. So, but I to get something that gets viewed by 1 million people is not that easy, particularly long form stuff. So maybe it's 100,000 views, maybe it's 1 million views. I don't know, but that's the figure that came into my head. Please don't hold me to that. Um, but I think we should agree maybe on a number of viewers that would be, on whatever the platform is, the number of viewers and the amount of media coverage the two things, the media coverage and the views, they're both important. But, you know, it should be the amount of media coverage and the number of views. I think that should be the measure. And I don't know what the threshold is, but that should be the measure of success or failure. And if it fails, there's not a lot, you know, you would have already paid for it and I would have already made the film, and I guess we just have to chalk it off as a failure. But it wouldn't be for want of effort. And, you know, some business ventures fail, but, you know, I'm going to make the film as good as I possibly can. Decred is going to want as many people to see the film as they possibly can if it's good. And so hopefully we'll have a self-reinforcing thing, and that this is a thing we won't ever have to discuss.
Yeah, it would still be a very historical achievement. You know, so to that, I would be very excited for the Decred community. I want to thank you, Dominic, for your time. And, you know, especially as I learned, you know, what circumstances of which you're willing to take this interview, our hearts as the Decred community go out to you and your family. So I think I speak for all of us. And I want to give the last word to you.
Oh yeah, thank you very much. My dad died in April 2020, but we were only allowed 12 people at his funeral, even though his funeral
I
was
see.
outside. So it's, you know, actually I'm starting to well up now, but so it's the funeral he should have had, whatever it is, 15 or 16 months ago is tomorrow.
For sure.
But it's the
And
wait, you know.
again, thank you for your time. I want to give the last word to you. Is there anything that we didn't discuss? You've answered all of the questions as we've been going, and so you know, I'm thankful that you've been able to do that. The community's thankful, but I want to give the last word to you.
Sure. Just thank you for watching the film this far, and I will do some more improvements to the Politeia proposal. I've had all sorts of problems with the site, by the way, so you'll see there's like 15 edits, but often like it's just a change of a full stop counts as another edit. But I'll get a more detailed budget. I will get this teaser video, and I will get a few paragraphs about taxation, because I think people understand taxation as, you know, income tax. It's much more than that. And so I have a few paragraphs about why the subject is so important. And then hopefully once all that's completed, you know, the discussion is over. No, there'll be a bit more discussion after the new uploads, and then hopefully we can get to a point where I can put it out to vote.
Absolutely. And I meant to mention this earlier. I'm just going to mention it here at the end. You know, a lot of distribution comes down to the community as well. That's the sort of the nature of the internet, is that we all have the distribution channels. And so you know, one thing that we've been talking a lot about in the marketing of Decred is, you know, the community has to be engaging. The community has to be posting. The community has to be commenting, because all these things matter. And so, you know, I hope that this passes. I hope that I hope that it's successful. I hope that the community is able to burden some of that as well for distribution. And so I just wanted to make sure I said that here.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I will be using all my own social media and all my own contacts in the media and everything else. I'll be pushing it to my own contacts. I mean, I can pretty much, you know, I can get us reviewed in some mainstream English press. You know, so I'll be pushing all of that as best I possibly can, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Dominic, for your time. We'll end the live stream here. Thank you, community. And yes, see you all in the next live stream.
Thank you.
Take care.